Somewhere around the third or fourth spring of buying flats of impatiens, marigolds, or petunias, something changes. You do the math, quietly, maybe while standing in the garden center with a cart full of six-packs, and you realize how much money has walked out of that yard every single fall. Not slowly, not gradually, all of it gone the moment the first frost hits. And then next April, you start over. Same beds, same bare patches, same weekend hauling bags of soil and planting things that will look great for about 8 weeks, before the heat or the drought or just plain August does them in. That feeling is not a gardening failure. It is just what annuals do. They bloom, they fade, and they leave you with nothing to show for it the following year. The problem is not your thumb. The problem is the plant. Perennials work differently. You put them in the ground once, and if you choose the right ones, they do not just survive. They spread. They fill in. They come back thicker than the year before, and the bare spots that used to haunt you slowly disappear on their own. Some of them double in size every couple of years without you doing a thing. That is the kind of garden that starts working for you instead of the other way around. If you want more simple, practical ideas like this one, plants that save you money, save your weekends, and still make the yard look like someone really cares about it, go ahead and subscribe. We keep things straightforward here, and there is always something useful coming next. Now, before we get into the plants themselves, it helps to know what we are actually looking for. Not every perennial is worth your time. Some come back reliably, but stay small forever and never really fill a bed. Others spread so fast they cross a line from helpful to headache. The ones on this list land in the middle of those two extremes. They return year after year. They spread at a pace that feels satisfying rather than alarming, and they do not ask for much in return. Most of them work across a wide range of climates, though a few have zone preferences worth noting. Most are happy in average soil, meaning you do not need to amend, fertilize, or fuss very much to get them going. And several of them look their best when you largely leave them alone, which is exactly what a tired gardener needs to hear. With that said, let's get into the first 3. Number 1, coneflower, Echinacea. Coneflower earns its place on this list for a simple reason. It does a little bit of everything. The blooms come in late summer when a lot of other flowers are already fading, so it covers a gap in the season that can otherwise leave beds looking tired. The classic variety produces those cheerful purple-pink daisy-like flowers with a raised orange center, though newer cultivars now come in yellow, red, white, and deep magenta if you want something a little different. What makes Echinacea a real bed filler is the way it spreads over time. In the first year, it gets established and may only give you a handful of blooms. Do not be discouraged by that. By the second and third year, it starts self-seeding around the original plant, and before long, you have a loose, natural-looking colony where there used to be bare dirt. You can also divide clumps every few years to move plants around the yard, which is a free way to fill more space. Care is minimal. Coneflower likes full sun but tolerates light shade. It is drought-tolerant once established, which means you can skip watering during dry stretches without losing the plant. Leave the seed heads standing in fall instead of cutting them down because birds will feed on them through winter, and the seeds will also drop and sprout the following spring. If you want a clean look, cut everything back in late winter before new growth starts. One thing worth knowing, Echinacea does best in well-drained soil. Soggy ground in winter is the main thing that kills it. If your beds stay wet, raise them slightly or add some grit to improve drainage, and the plant will thank you for years. Number 2, daylily. Few plants deliver as much color for as little effort as the daylily. The name comes from the fact that each individual flower lasts only 1 day, but a healthy clump produces so many buds on each stem that the blooms keep coming for weeks. Some varieties rebloom later in the season, which gives you 2 rounds of color from a single plant. Daylilies spread by forming ever larger clumps at the root. Plant 1 division, and within 3 or 4 years, you can have a clump wide enough to divide into 5 or 6 new plants. That makes them one of the most cost-effective perennials you can buy. A single flat of daylilies purchased one spring can, with patience, fill an entire bed slope or border without spending another dollar. They are not fussy about soil or sun, though they bloom best with at least 6 hours of direct light per day. Watering needs are low once they settle in. They tolerate heat, brief drought, and average fertility, and they come back reliably in zones 3 through 9. One caution worth mentioning, the common orange ditch lily, the one you see growing wild along roadsides, can spread quite aggressively through underground runners. It is not necessarily bad, but it can become difficult to contain in a small bed. If you want better color variety and slightly less aggressive spreading, look for named cultivars at the garden center rather than the generic orange types. Varieties like Stella d'Oro, Happy Returns, or any of the modern reblooming hybrids give you more control and a wider palette. Which part of your yard feels the emptiest right now? A shady corner, a sunny border, or something along a fence? Drop it in the comments. It helps to know what you are actually working with. Number 3, Black-Eyed Susan, Rudbeckia. Black-Eyed Susans are one of those plants that look like they belong in a cottage garden painting, but they grow with the ease of a roadside wildflower. The bright yellow petals surrounding that dark brown center are nearly impossible to miss from across a yard, and they bloom from midsummer well into fall, a long season that makes them worth every inch of bed space they take up. Like Echinacea, Rudbeckia spreads mainly through self-seeding. Once you have a few plants established, they quietly drop seeds at the end of the season, and those seeds sprout the following spring a little further out from the original plant. Over 2 or 3 years, a small planting can turn into a generous, informal sweep of color. The spread is easy to manage. Simply pull unwanted seedlings in spring while they are still small. If they pop up somewhere you did not intend. Black-Eyed Susans prefer full sun and handle dry spells well. They are not bothered much by heat, humidity, or poor soil, which makes them a good choice for spots where other plants have struggled. Deadheading spent blooms can encourage a longer flowering period. But if you leave the seed heads standing, birds will eat the seeds and the plant will self-sow more readily for next year. Either approach works, depending on whether you prefer more blooms now or more plants later. They are short-lived perennials in some climates, meaning they may only persist for 2 or 3 years in any one spot. The self-seeding habit more than compensates for that, though, because new seedlings keep the colony going even as older plants fade out. Think of them less as permanent fixtures and more as a self-renewing crop. The first 3 plants on this list are workhorses, and if you stopped there, you would already have a yard worth looking at. But the next 3 bring something a little different to the table: lower profiles, softer textures, and a spreading habit that works especially well along edges, pathways, and the front of a border, where you want plants to spill forward without taking over. Number 4, Creeping Phlox, Phlox subulata. Creeping phlox does something that very few low-growing plants manage to pull off. It looks absolutely spectacular for about 3 weeks in spring, and then it quietly becomes a dense, weed-suppressing mat of evergreen foliage for the rest of the year. That combination, dramatic seasonal color plus year-round ground coverage, is why it earns a spot here. The blooms arrive in early to mid-spring, covering the plant so completely that you can barely see the foliage underneath. Colors range from white and soft pink to lavender and deep magenta, depending on the variety. If you plant a few different shades along a slope or the edge of a raised bed, the effect in April looks like something from a garden magazine without requiring anywhere near that level of effort. After flowering, the plant settles back into its role as ground cover. The foliage stays low and dense, usually only a few inches tall, and it spreads outward steadily each year by rooting as it goes. A single plant can eventually cover a square foot or more per growing season, which means a small investment fills in surprisingly fast. Creeping phlox prefers full sun and well-drained soil. It does not handle soggy ground or heavy shade well, so keep that in mind when choosing a spot. It performs best in zones 3 through 9, which covers a wide portion of North America. After blooming, give it a light trim with scissors or hedge shears to keep the shape tidy. and encourage denser growth the following year. That is really the only maintenance it asks for. One of the best uses for creeping phlox is on slopes or embankments, where mowing is awkward and bare soil tends to wash away. Once it fills in, it holds the ground, crowds out weeds, and needs almost no attention between seasons. For anyone who has struggled with a difficult slope or a dry, sunny strip along the driveway, this plant is a straightforward answer. Number 5. Catmint, Nepeta. Catmint is one of those plants that experienced gardeners reach for again and again. Not because it is showy in a dramatic way, but because it solves so many problems at once. It produces long spikes of small lavender-blue flowers from late spring through summer. It has soft gray-green foliage that looks attractive even when it is not blooming. It handles heat and drought with ease, and it spreads into a full, rounded mound that does a beautiful job of softening the hard edges of a bed or pathway. The variety most commonly found at garden centers is Nepeta x Fasani, and cultivars like Walker's Low, which, despite the name, grows about 2 to 3 feet wide, are particularly reliable. Plant one in spring, and by midsummer you will have a substantial mound of color. By the following year, the clump will be noticeably larger. Division every 3 or 4 years keeps it from getting too woody in the center, and gives you extra plants to move elsewhere. Care is about as simple as it gets. Catmint wants full sun to light shade and average to dry soil. Overwatering or overly rich soil actually works against it. The plant tends to flop open in the middle when it gets too much fertility or moisture. Give it lean conditions and good drainage, and it stays compact and tidy. After the first big flush of blooms fades in early summer, cut the whole plant back by about a third. Most gardeners are surprised by how quickly it rebounds, often with a second wave of flowers within a few weeks. Catmint is also worth mentioning for what it keeps away. Deer and rabbits tend to leave it alone, which makes it a useful border plant in gardens where browsing animals are a regular frustration. It will not make your yard completely pest-proof, but planting it along the edges of beds you want to protect is a reasonable strategy. Have you tried catmint before, or is this one new to you? Let me know in the comments. It tends to surprise people who have not grown it yet. Number 6. Russian Sage, Perovskia atriplycifolia. Russian sage makes a bold statement for a plant that asks very little from you. From midsummer through early fall, it produces tall, airy spikes of small violet-blue flowers on silver-white stems, and the overall effect is almost cloud-like, a haze of color that moves gently in a breeze and catches the light beautifully in the afternoon. It pairs well with nearly everything. Yellows, oranges, pinks, and whites all look good next to it, which makes it easy to work into an existing bed without a lot of planning. The plant grows into a large, upright clump, typically 3 to 4 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. It does not spread by runners or seed the way some of the other plants on this list do, but it fills its own space generously, and over time, the clump slowly expands outward. In a bed that feels sparse, a few plants spaced 2 to 3 feet apart can close a lot of ground within a couple of seasons. Russian sage thrives in full sun and well-drained to dry soil. It is one of the most drought-tolerant perennials available, which makes it a strong choice for hot, dry climates where other plants fade out by August. It handles poor soil better than rich soil, and it does not need fertilizing. Too much moisture or shade causes the stems to flop, so a sunny, slightly dry spot is where it performs best. There is one care note worth taking seriously. Russian sage is a subshrub, meaning it develops woody stems at the base over time. Do not cut it back in fall. Wait until late winter or very early spring. Then cut the stems back hard, to about 6 to 8 inches above the ground. New growth will emerge from the base, and the plant will come back strong. Cutting it back in fall or too early in cold climates can expose the crown to damage. A quick note on geography. Russian sage has been flagged as potentially invasive in parts of the western United States, particularly in areas near natural waterways. If you garden in the western U.S. or in a dryland environment, It is worth checking with your local extension service before planting it in large quantities. For most gardeners in the central and eastern regions, it is a well-behaved and deeply rewarding perennial that earns its space every single season. The plants covered so far range from knee-high color bursts to ground-hugging mats, and between them they can handle sun, drought, slopes, edges, and problem spots that have resisted other solutions. The next three take things in a slightly different direction. These are plants that bring texture and structure into the picture, plants that look intentional, even designed, without needing a designer's level of attention to keep them that way. Number 7. Woodland Sage, Salvia nemorosa. Salvia nemorosa is one of the most reliable flowering perennials you can put in a sunny bed, and it tends to be underused simply because it does not get the same attention as showier plants. That is a mistake worth correcting. From late spring into early summer, it sends up dense, upright spikes of deep violet, blue, pink, or white flowers that hold their color for weeks. The foliage is neat and low-growing, forming a tidy clump that stays attractive even between bloom periods. What sets woodland sage apart from many other salvias is its cold hardiness. It performs well in zones 4 through 8, which means gardeners in colder regions can count on it coming back reliably without much protection. It is also notably compact. Most varieties stay between 18 and 24 inches tall, which makes it easier to work into the front or middle of a border without worrying about it blocking shorter plants behind it. The spreading habit is gradual and well-behaved. Clumps widen slowly over time and can be divided every few years to multiply your stock. The real trick to getting more flowers is deadheading or cutting the plant back by about half after the first flush of blooms fades. Do that, give it a week or two, and a second round of flowering follows. Some gardeners get a third flush in early fall if the season stays mild. That kind of repeat performance from a plant that needs no staking, no special soil, and no significant watering once it is established is genuinely hard to beat. Salvia nemorosa wants full sun and average, well-drained soil. It handles dry stretches without complaint and is largely ignored by deer. In terms of companions, it works beautifully alongside yellow flowers, coreopsis, black-eyed Susans, or daylilies, because the contrast between the violet spikes and warm yellow tones is one of the more effortless color combinations in the garden. One thing to keep in mind, this is Salvia nemorosa specifically, the ornamental perennial sage. It is different from culinary sage and from the tender salvias sold as annuals in warm climates. When you are shopping, look for the species name or familiar cultivars like Caradonna, Maynite, or Marcus to make sure you are getting the hardy perennial version. Number 8. Sedum/stonecrop Hylotelephium. Sedum, now more accurately grouped under the name Hylotelephium for the upright varieties, is one of those plants that earns its keep across 3 full seasons. In spring and early summer, the foliage alone is worth having. Thick, fleshy leaves in shades of blue-green, gray, or deep burgundy make the plant look attractive long before any flowers appear. By late summer and into fall, flat-topped flower heads open in shades of pink, rose, or dusty red, arriving exactly when the garden needs them most, and most other perennials are winding down. Then, as temperatures drop, the seed heads dry in place and hold their structure through winter, giving the bed visual interest even after everything else has gone dormant. The upright sedums, varieties like Autumn Joy, Matrona, or Herbstfreude, grow into sturdy clumps about 18 to 24 inches tall and wide. They spread steadily by expanding at the base, and like most perennials on this list, they can be divided every few years to fill more ground. A single clump bought this spring can become 3 or 4 plants by the time you divide it in year 3 or 4, and each division transplants easily. Care is straightforward. Sedum wants full sun and well-drained soil above everything else. It is drought-tolerant to a strong degree. These are succulent-leaved plants, after all, storing water in their foliage. And they do not need fertilizing in average garden soil. What they do not like is wet feet. Poorly drained soil, especially in winter, is the one condition that causes problems. Good drainage is non-negotiable if you want them to return reliably year after year. Do you tend to prefer flowers for color or plants with interesting foliage? Sedum is one of the few perennials that genuinely delivers both. And it is worth dropping in the comments which one matters more to you when you are filling a bed. The main maintenance task is cutting the old stems back in early spring before new growth emerges. Some gardeners leave the dried seed heads standing all winter for structure and wildlife value, which is a perfectly reasonable choice. Either way, the plant comes back strong without any particular help from you. Number 9, yarrow, Achillea millefolium. Yarrow is the kind of plant that thrives precisely where other plants give up. Baking hot summers, rocky or sandy soil, long dry stretches without rain, yarrow handles all of it without looking troubled. The flat-topped flower clusters come in yellow, white, pink, red, and soft salmon depending on the variety, and they bloom from early summer through much of the season. Cut them off as they fade, and the plant often pushes out a fresh round of blooms within a few weeks. The foliage is fine and feathery, almost fern-like in texture, and it forms a low mat that spreads steadily by sending out shallow underground runners. This is where a small note of caution belongs. Yarrow can spread enthusiastically in ideal conditions, particularly in loose, fertile soil. In an established border with good drainage and average fertility, the spreading is easy to manage. Simply pull or dig back the edges in spring. In a very open bed with rich, loose soil, it can get ahead of you if you are not paying attention. The solution is not to avoid it, but to plant it where spreading is actually welcome, which for most empty beds is exactly the point. Named cultivars tend to be less aggressive than the straight species. Varieties like Moonshine, with its clear yellow flowers and silvery foliage, or the Seduction series in shades of coral and rose, give you better color control and slightly more contained growth. They are worth seeking out over plain white or generic yellow types if you want something that stays where you put it while still filling in reliably. Yarrow prefers full sun and performs best in well-drained to dry soil. It does not need deadheading to keep blooming, though cutting spent flower heads back to a side shoot encourages tidier regrowth. In very rich soil, the stems can get tall and floppy, so lean conditions actually produce a sturdier, more upright plant. Zones 3 through 9 cover most of the regions where it grows reliably, and deer tend to avoid it, which is a quiet but useful bonus in a lot of yards. 9 plants in, and the list has covered a wide range of shapes, sizes, and situations. The final 2 bring something that the earlier entries do not quite replicate: movement and late-season staying power. These are plants that look alive even on a still day, that carry the garden through the months when everything else is winding down, and that ask for very little in exchange for that kind of presence. Number 10. Feather reed grass, Calamagrostis ex acutiflora Karl Fürster. Ornamental grasses get recommended so often that the suggestion can start to feel generic, so it is worth being specific here. Karl Fürster feather reed grass is not just any ornamental grass. It is one of the most widely tested, reliably returning, and well-behaved grasses available to home gardeners, and it earns that reputation every year. The plant grows in a tight, upright clump that reaches 4 to 5 feet tall in bloom. In late spring, feathery flower plumes emerge above the foliage and shift from pinkish bronze to wheat gold as summer progresses. Those plumes stay standing through fall and into winter, catching frost, holding snow, and giving the bed a sculptural quality that almost nothing else can match in the colder months. The foliage itself is narrow and arching, remaining green and attractive from spring through the first hard frosts, then fading to warm tan through winter. What makes Karl Fürster particularly useful for filling empty beds is its clumping habit. Unlike some ornamental grasses that spread by underground runners and can quickly become invasive, this one stays where you put it. The clump expands slowly outward over the years, never running, never jumping the border. Planting several in a row, spaced about 2 feet apart, creates a tall, flowing screen or backdrop that fills in within 2 to 3 seasons and requires almost no maintenance to look intentional and polished. Care is minimal. This grass performs well in full sun to light shade and tolerates a wide range of soil conditions, including clay. It handles heat, cold, wind, and drought without complaint. Zones 4 through 9 cover its reliable range. The one annual task is cutting the whole clump back hard in late winter or very early spring before new growth begins, down to about 4 to 6 inches above the ground. 10 minutes per plant, and then it is done for the year. That takes about 10 minutes per plant, and then it is done for the year. A word on choosing ornamental grasses more broadly. Not all of them behave this well. Japanese silvergrass, for example, self-seeds prolifically and is considered invasive in parts of the eastern United States. When shopping for grasses, clump-forming varieties are the ones to look for. Carl Förster is a safe, proven choice that delivers drama without the management headaches that come with running or seeding types. Number 11. Coreopsis, tickseed. Coreopsis closes the list because it does something simple and important. It blooms for a very long time. It spreads willingly, and it is nearly impossible to kill through ordinary neglect. For a gardener who wants color from early summer all the way into fall without doing much work to maintain it, few perennials compete with Coreopsis on that combination of persistence and ease. The flowers are cheerful and daisy-like, most commonly bright yellow, though newer cultivars offer shades of orange, red, soft pink, and bicolors. The foliage is fine and delicate-looking, which creates a light, airy texture in the bed. That contrasts nicely with broader-leaved plants nearby. The plant stays relatively low. Most perennial varieties grow between 1 and 2 feet tall, which makes it well-suited for the front of a border or along a pathway, where you want continuous color without a plant that blocks the view of everything behind it. Threadleaf Coreopsis, Coreopsis verticillata, is the variety most recommended for reliable spreading and long bloom. Cultivars like Moonbeam, with its soft pale yellow flowers, and Zagreb, which produces a brighter golden yellow, are two of the most widely available and consistently well-reviewed options. Both spread steadily by forming wider clumps over time, and Moonbeam in particular has a reputation for blooming from June through September, with only light deadheading to keep it going. Care requirements are low. Coreopsis wants full sun, at least 6 hours per day, and well-drained soil. It handles drought well. It does not need fertilizing in average soil. Deadheading encourages continued blooming. Divide clumps every 3 or 4 years in spring to keep them vigorous and multiply your plants. One zone note: most perennial Coreopsis varieties are reliable in zones 4 through 9. For northern zones and guaranteed returns, yellow-flowered varieties like Moonbeam or Zagreb are the safer bet. Which plant from this list are you most excited to try first? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more straightforward gardening advice that skips the complicated parts and gets to what actually works. Filling an empty bed does not have to mean starting over every spring. The 11 plants on this list are proof that a little patience in year 1 pays off for years beyond it. Start with 2 or 3 that match your conditions, your sun, your soil, your zone, and let them do what perennials do best. They will spread, they will return, and before long the beds will feel like the best part of the yard.